Brazilian Shirt Name Podcast with Dotun Adebayo and Tim Vickery.
Yeah, we're not even wasting time on this edition because we've got arguably two Legendinos on the same pod. Of course, Tim Vickery, as always, is in Brazil, but another Legendino, David Goldblatt. We wait ages and ages and ages and ages for one of his books to come along, and it never disappoints. And this time around, he's done a proper cracker of a job on football and its prism to the world. Injury Time, it's called. Thank you, Tim. David, welcome back, mate. Whew.
Lovely to be with you. Thank you for having me.
You've kept me up at night, and I'm supposed to be keeping you up at night, technically. But what a book you've got. So much to talk about. I don't want to waste any time, but let's get the elephant in the room out of the way, first of all. North London, what, Tim? Hang on. Eberichi Eze?
An ant.
But nevertheless, we who are over here in the UK, David, know what a fiasco that has been. Any thoughts on that first?
Well, it just strikes me, Daniel Levy is always portrayed, and I think thinks of himself as one of, the great wheeler dealers and the smartest businessman in the room, etc. And why didn't he just pay up the extra 5 million and get on with it and sort it out? I just think it's an absolutely just disastrous bit of transfer dealing by someone who's meant to be an expert in this field. So I'm very, very disappointed.
But is this not, Mr. Goldblatt, one of the themes of your new mighty tome entitled "Injury Time"? The absolute boneheaded stupidity of the current capitalist class. But we will get there. The book, I think, starts. This is a story of the relationship, Injury Time, football in a state of emergency. It's a story of the relationship between football and Britain over the last few years. And I think it starts with a fantastic premise. It's a brilliant premise. Let's go back to the mid-80s. It's the height of the soap operas and the low point of football. Fast forward 40 years and football is the nation's soap opera. I think that's such a brilliant starting point for your book. What story were you trying to tell?
Well, I kind of feel that the last 10 or 15 years have been the most tumultuous of my life, though I suspect there's nothing as to the next 10 or 15 to come. And I was looking around saying, where's the book that covers this? Where's the film that covers this? Who can, we've had a global economic crisis. We've had the destruction of what was left of the British welfare state and the social contract. We've had Brexit. We've had COVID. We've had populism, the rise of social media, a mental health crisis, a climate crisis. And these things are all connected. And while there are books and thoughts and books about bits of it, where's the thing that puts it all together? And I asked myself, will football carry that story? Will it allow me to begin to make sense of this just maelstrom of social change? And as is often the way, I think, with my books, I get to the point, well, if someone else isn't going to do it, I'm just going to have to do it myself. So it was an attempt to try and grasp all of these extraordinary things and the place of football within it. I mean, football's not just a reflection of these things, though it is. It has become actually the central mode of collective storytelling in modern Britain. I mean, good thing, bad thing, that's a whole another debate that we can have, but it sure occupies that space in an era where politicians have stopped telling stories other than conspiracy theories. And so I hummed and hard, and then the Gary Lineker moment when Match of the Day goes on strike because Gary Lineker has tweeted about the government's just unbelievable, appalling use of language to describe migrants and been forced to step down. And then Ian Wright and Alan Shearer say, well, we're out too. And then the rest of the commentators come out. And as you know, the worst match of the day ever without commentary or punditry or anything appears. And I just thought, this is amazing that football is the space and football people are the people making this argument in the most sort of public and powerful way. I gotta see what we can do here. So it's the coming together of those things to tell the story of modern Britain, and it's one told, in anger because it has been such an appalling time in so many ways, but it's one that really comes from a place of love as well. I love this place. It's what made me, and I love football. And both of which seem to me imperiled and undermined in so many ways. So it's about bringing all of that kind of intellectual and emotional energy together in one place.
Let me just say, for the purposes of protocol, that if you want to get in touch with David, take the opportunity. You can contact him by all the methods shown just below, etc. You can follow us on YouTube. Make sure you do that as well, and then you can just send us a message as you listen. And of course, if you're not listening live on YouTube now, well, you can listen again in the audio version of the podcast. Quite a few things, and David's already explained the premise of the book. Then we ought to add the word cultural commentator to your many list of titles, which include sports journalist, of course, sports writer, author of amazing books, because you're right, you do find the story that nobody else is telling. I love the way Tim set this up as, the nation's soap opera. Got quite a few questions myself.
He
on
set
this.
it up. He set
Well,
that
yeah,
up.
but
That's
ultimately you
the way
picked
he
it up
sets the
for
book up. Yeah.
exactly. But you picked it out for our podcast as a launching pad, and I think that's an important point in itself. And hopefully we'll come back to that in many different ways as well. But it's not just the fact that you've identified the gap in the market, but also it's the way you tell it. And I've always thought that football's interesting when we pull out, or when we look at the world through the prism of football, like Bob Marley did. Bob Marley, as you know, he would say, "Oh man, football, it's about the world," and he's the first person I ever heard say it in that way. That football is not just a round ball. Look at the shape of the earth. Look at the shape of that ball. What do you think is connected, etc.? And we don't always see that. One of your early chapters is about Brexit. And I'd forgotten, genuinely, I'd forgotten how much football was linked to the Brexit debate and how individual footballers, were convinced to come out either in favour of Brexit or in favour of Remain. I'm going to ask you questions on this later on, Tim. So remember, the question will be, did David Beckham err on the side of Remain, or did he err on the side of Brexit? You've read the book, so you ought to know. But yeah, we forget, don't we, David, that football is actually the politics as well, the real politics of this.
You've forgotten. I'd forgotten. I went back and it was, discovered that David James, was writing articles about this in The Sun, arguing like kind of some of the Leave campaign was saying, sure, we'll leave Europe, but this is going to open up India to us. He wrote this article in The Sun saying, this is great. India is going to provide a whole new bunch of footballers. We're going to not have Europeans, but that's going to be good for India. Who knew? Sol Campbell, similarly, was wheeled out to make the argument that,
Do you think they were making a point? I'm sorry to cut you there, because that struck me that they use these two, if you like, sons of immigration to say, well, hang on a second, us lot, we ain't racist, but look at the rest of the world. You get me?
Sure. I think that, at that point, there were always undertones of race and nativist versions of British and English identity underscoring the Leave campaign. But there was also an effort to portray it as merely an argument of economic and political common sense. And that's the sort of version that you're hearing from Sol Campbell and from David James. So I think it was, but they were good. They were good for leave. They made sense for them to put them up there. I mean, of course, on the other hand, you've got plenty of, sons of immigrants, on the Remain side. And I thought, again, so interesting that Rio Ferdinand said, in his post on the matter, I've never voted before in my life, but this is so important, I'm going to vote. And I just thought that was a really interesting moment. It pulled everybody slightly out of the woodwork. And Rio made a really great argument. I mean, if only the Remain campaign actually had made it with the sort of passion and the authenticity of his personal story, we'd have, maybe that would have made a difference. I don't know, but I thought it was really remarkable.
I would take your thing further back, and see, for me, the greatest act of self-harm that the country has done since the Second World War is not Brexit, it's the sale of council housing. And for me, one leads to the other, because the sale of council housing was done in order to destroy council housing and to push people into private land, in the return of the private landlord. And it's been a wrecking ball which has destroyed absolutely everything. Destroyed everything. Just look at the high street. It's destroyed the high street. The financialization of property has it's even destroyed personal relationships, because personal relationships now are based on, does he or she have a house? All right, I'm in there. It's destroyed everything. It's been like a wrecking ball, which is why I think your book should be read in tandem with this by Danny Dorling, Shattered Nation.
Great book. I mean, that's one of the books that I read, in preparation for writing Injury Time, and it is a great book. And when I read it, it was one of the books that made me think, on issues like council housing and global economics and inequality. Yeah, Danny Dorling is 100% our man. But then there's all this other stuff going on, and I wanted to connect all of those together. And the selling off of council housing, that was one of the great social, economic and cultural achievements of working class industrial Britain. I mean, it was an amazing thing. After the Second World War, we built millions upon millions of houses, decent houses, insulated houses.
Both political parties. Both of them
and
did it.
I grew up in one. I don't know about you. I grew up in one, and it made life possible, made life tolerable. Despite any other kind of inequalities, like what a launch pad to have the security, of a council house in that regard. And it absolutely has been devastating. And when we now know that more than half of the houses sold under right to buy are in the hands of private landlords. Yeah. And it has had a devastating consequence on communities, as you say, on the high street, and it's generated an enormous amount of anger. That sense of, the social contract being broken. And it's one of the great, if you want to draw the parallels further, I often think, how did we manage to sit back and let the great institutions of English football, again, one of the priceless creations of working class industrial England, be just sold off on the cheap to a bunch of scallywags and scoundrels and oligarchs. And we allowed the same to happen to council housing. And, we
inequality. The society, football, the mirror between those two is that gives such depth to your book.
And it's, and it's scary, and we still haven't turned it round. And one of the, the other parallel is that for so long, the ruling ideology, the ruling common sense is, well, you can't do anything about it. It's all been done. It's all over, done and dusted. And
it's not even as simple as that. I think because I don't quite agree, make of this whatever you like. And I grew up on a council estate, in fact, perhaps the most notorious one of all in London terms. And it was a wonderful place to be. And I remember certainly in the late 60s where a council flat was an aspiration, because many of us still lived in bedsits, a whole family. In my case, a whole family in a bedsit. Many of my friends at school still went to the local baths for a shower of an evening, sometimes only once a week, but nevertheless, that's why they were called the local baths, because working class people didn't have bathrooms and showers in their own houses. They had a loo outside in what was a little shed, a wooden shed often enough, with a lavatory in it. It seems almost absurd now, but that was reality. So going to a council flat, even if you were up on the 20th floor of a council flat in Tottenham of all places, I remember, friends of mine who lived on the next road, they were 16 in their family. They moved to like a council flat, couldn't be more than 2 and 3 bedroom. They were so looking forward to it. Down the road, Tiverton Estate, I remember it very clearly. The Graysons moved in there, and they had their own like toilets indoors and bathroom, and don't know if they had central heating in that side, but they had like double glazing or something. The properties look great. Having said that, this is England or Britain, and since the feudal times, commoners' rights have been eroded, particularly with trespass laws and everything like that. Rights to roam have been eroded, etc. Laws, ancient laws like the right to occupy an empty building, what we used to call squatting, which that's how I lived. When I was thrown out of home at the age of 17, that's what we were doing. We were squatting. That has been eroded. So it's I think. Although you're absolutely right, we all assume that, oh, well, that's it, because it's always been like that, so it will always be like that. Part of it is that we always adapt to it. And I don't deny that the destruction of council housing is a particularly difficult. It's like the erosion of the BBC or the attacks on the BBC. You have this crown in your jewel, or the NHS. You go to other countries, like Americans say to me, "Oh, you lot are so lucky to have the NHS." Yeah, because it's the flipping best in the world. It was the one that established the idea of free healthcare at the point of need. We're the ones who did it, and then suddenly we're prepared to like sell it out to the highest bidder. Mr. Trump will probably say now in his latest deals, "Look, I'll tell you what, you won't have to pay so many tariffs if you can open up the NHS to our pharmaceutical companies." So I'm saying it happens because of a disparity in what we used to call the class system in Britain. Some people make the rules. Babylon makes the rules. Was it Steel Pulse did that? But that goes into one of your other chapters, leveling the playing field. This is a real issue. And by the way, before I forget, please forgive me. I wanted to say as well, when you were talking earlier on about football's ability to be able to interpret society as well, it's even changed the language. Look at the title of your book, Injury Time. Once upon a time, that was somebody who had to go to the NHS and wait in A&E for loads and loads of time. Now, the only thing you think about is, oh, for God's sake, this game's going to go on for 100 minutes. You know
And
what I
you
mean?
cannot move for the use of football language in the public realm. I mean, only 2 days ago, Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, talking about the first year of the Labour government, says we're 2-0 down, but there's still time to bring it round before the
Yeah.
final whistle in the next election. And that's not odd. That's not actually now not unusual. You know, I mean, I think you probably saw it in the book, when Jonathan Van Tam, the deputy chief medical officer during COVID, he never stopped using football metaphors as a way of trying to explain the importance of vaccines or whatever to the public. So it's absolutely the warp and weft of public conversation now in a way that, it never was before.
Cricket, didn't it, once upon a time, and now
Absolutely.
use a cricket analogy and nobody gets it. I think Jonathan Van Tam was well advised by a PR company. Use football because that's a way of breaking down all these complex issues in a way that people will understand. But
Yeah.
even people who don't follow football understand it. Whereas people who don't follow, cricket will have a hard time. There's that great
Yeah.
John Betjeman poem. It's called Cricket Master. You know, um, if you will indulge me for a moment, because it is one of those ones that I can actually sing. It's a poem by Betjeman, and it goes, "My undergraduate eyes beholding, as I climb your slope cat hill, what care I for past disasters? Applicant for cricket master, nothing much of cricket knowing, conscious but of money owing, somehow I would cope, cat ill." And then he goes on to say, "Oh my God, what is, how many balls making over? This, that, and the other." He doesn't know any of the cricketing terms. And he's like applying for a cricket master's job, etc.
Love
Nowadays,
it.
yeah,
Love it.
now,
I think the funny.
Nowadays, if he had enough money, he would get it. And this is another of the themes of the book, isn't it? The great sell-off. And we've been told for 45 years about the efficiency of the private sector and efficiency and efficiency and efficiency. And one of the things that your book it strips very bare is the emperor's new clothes with these modern day capitalists.
I mean,
Some of them are. Go on.
I was just going to say, I mean, it just is extraordinary that, the 33 seasons of the Premier League, only 4 seasons has the Premier League en masse made a profit. I calculate that OnlyFans has paid more corporation tax in the last 2 years than the whole Premier League has in 33 years. I mean, I don't know quite what to make of that. It's extraordinary. I mean, the Premier League is over $11 billion in debt. $11 billion in debt. This is just absolutely insane. People, but then in the end, it's still really not a business. We talk about it like it's a business, but the currency is not profit and loss. The currency for the people who wield power is status, geopolitical positioning, soft power, a route to some kind of modicum of meaning for the ennui that strikes the global super rich. A desperate attempt to revive their ice cold souls by connection with humanity. And people are prepared to pay a lot of money for their soul, eh?
One of my favourite things is your withering scorn for those private equity firms who've come in thinking that they can make money from this. You talk about their touching naivety, because they're not really very good, are they? These companies, all they know how to do is sweat the asset, which means cut, while giving themselves more bonus payments. In a genuinely competitive field like football, when you don't have a monopoly position, just how stupid they are is revealed again and again and again. Is it not?
And their sort of naivety about technological optimism and all of the kind of whizzy bullshit accounting tricks that they pull to stay afloat. I mean, really, like Todd Bowley, what's your trick? Oh, your trick is an amortization over 8 years as a way of fiddling the books. And then you sell the women's club at a value that it is clearly how can Chelsea women be worth £200 million? But you sell that to one of your associates, and suddenly you evade all the PSR rules, and this is what they're actually bringing. I mean, it's the trick generally of the global financial elite, is to tell us how good they are, how much they're sorting it all out for everybody, whereas in actual fact they're building a house of cards while they enrich themselves and then make incredibly vulgar displays of their incredibly poor taste.
Were you tempted to do more on the Glazers and Man United, or did the lawyer class shut you down?
Actually, the lawyers were much more concerned about Sir Jim than they were about the Glazers in that regard. I mean, I did think about doing a bit more about them, but much of their, as they say, much of their best work was done in the first 10 years. And they've just been plugging the same old tunes ever since.
So their early stuff was good, was it?
Certainly good for them.
Yeah, their second album, I didn't think much of that at all, did you? Yeah, and this again is one of the geniuses of your book, is that you managed to tell the story, better than the London mayor of football's ability to always, I think, use the phrase illustrate something profound about our society. And you take us through those years from, I suppose, the financial crisis in 1988. And again, it's not just Brexit, it's all the things that have happened since then, including, of course, the pandemic bang in the middle of it. But also, I think you've got a chapter about the fragmentation of the United Kingdom, and that's always a point of debate as well. But where does football come into that? I'm a fan, as you know, listeners to this podcast will
Even
remember.
likes the home championships.
That's what I was about to
Even
say.
for,
Yeah, I know Tim hates it, but look, I used to love it. I was at the right age for it. You know, when Scotland meant something, Ireland meant maybe not so much Northern Ireland, but Wales also meant something in those days, and it was a real contest. And
I mean, I
England were the
think
world champions.
the amazing thing about um, football in the United Kingdom is that it is a very rare example where we have distinct separate institutions for England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. And obviously,
Lucky.
devolution has begun to change that a little bit, but certainly before that, and particularly for the English, you know, who have lived inside the carapace of, you know, the United Kingdom, Britain, without ever actually addressing their Englishness and what that kind of means. So it's an amazing space in which, you know, as we know, nations are imagined and invented and produced and reproduced constantly. They're not fixed essences that are discovered. They're, you know, social creations and inventions. And, you know, the English in particular have really struggled with that. I mean, the Scots have, you know, they've had their law, their separate university system. You know, there's a whole bunch of stuff. Wales has its own distinct language. You know, where could you invent and reinvent and demonstrate Englishness? You know, English National Opera, English heritage. I mean, this is hopeless, you know. But the England football team has provided, and you know, both male and female, has provided an amazing space in which that can happen. And it's been really interesting to watch how this has played out over the last 10, 15 years. I mean, one of the small bits of the book, but something I particularly enjoyed, was looking at Wales, you know, who've had an amazing decade in football. This is their best ever. I think it's amazing that, you know, where once rugby union would have been the space in which Welshness was publicly explored and invented, has without doubt been superseded by the Welsh national football team. And a different kind of Wales is emerging. And no disrespect to rugby union and no disrespect to its constituency, but it's an older Wales. It's the Wales of the valleys and of the old and now tiring kind of Labour hegemony of the south of Wales. And Welsh football is much more cosmopolitan, more global in its outlook. You know, it's the super furry animals and Catatonia, not the Eisteddfod and a bunch of leeks and daffodils. And again, no disrespect to the Eisteddfod either, but where is most of modern urban Wales at? You know, it's in that realm.
Aren't they?
And I've really enjoyed following Wales over the last 10 years, and I think it's been a really interesting cultural experiment, you know, with the Welsh Football Association sometimes sounding more like the Gaelic Athletic Association of the early 20th century, understanding football, you know, and sport as a really profound space in which a new kind of national identity can be forged. And I love it that they're insisting on Wales being called Cymru, not just Wales. Like, and why not? You know, and also provided just a lot of entertainment for us all. I've enjoyed that. And so that's been a really interesting space. And Northern Ireland, similarly, has been a really interesting space. I mean, one which is still deeply conflictual. You know, I think it's a really important reminder that, and everybody who was on the Leave side in the Brexit debate kind of like, oh, Northern Ireland, that's sorted. Don't need to worry about that. And I think football's been a really interesting indicator of how Northern Ireland has changed, but also how the tensions and the conflicts of the last 100 years are still simmering quietly beneath the surface. And Scotland, again, is such an interesting example of Scotland's dilemma. On the one hand, of course, if it was economically painless, most of Scotland wouldn't hang around for 2 seconds. They'd be off in a minute. Of course they would.
They
But,
built a wall the last time, didn't they, to stop us going up there?
but
So they'll
then,
probably do that again, a bigger wall.
Scottish footballers discovered that when you're severed from English football, as they now are, so much money used to go north from selling players south. Now very few Scottish players are being sold. And that makes, a lot of people think twice about the independence movement. So I think at all of these levels, it's proved so interesting. And then England, as English football and the English national football team and its following is absolutely the very worst of the country and absolutely the very best of the country. It's a really, really important space in which these things are being fought out. The whole flag thing that's going on at the moment, I think, is so interesting, where the right are trying to monopolise the meaning of the St George's flag for their own narrow, appalling, nativist and uncultured version of Englishness. And, for the last 10 years, actually, England and the St George's Cross has been a real rallying point for a much more progressive, multicultural, diverse England. All the evidence, and all the surveys say that, migrant communities find actually the St George's flag until now has been much easier to relate to because the Union Jack is unambiguously, that's the flag of empire. It's not the English Empire, it's the British Empire. And people feel
Scotland, it's a story that Scotland quite likes to forget. But Scotland was a big partner in the empire, wasn't it? A really, really big partner.
That's why they signed up. That's why they dissolved basically the Scottish Parliament. It's like let's have we'd like a bit of that, please. And Scots provided at one point a third of colonial governors and more than a third of the officer class in the British Army. And they've left all of the imperial guilt for the English to deal with. But
one thing about the England thing, it just fascinated me was and you go into it, was the Southgate years. Because Southgate seemed to me, he was trying to build this bridge between, because he's a very well brought up, very traditionalist, kind of stand up for the Queen kind of bloke. Mm-hmm. And there was a bridge that he was trying to build between that old school patriotism and a new, more inclusive, multicultural patriotism. Mm-hmm. And football, with these fantastic narratives that it comes up. And in the Euros in 2001, and the way that the final played out, he showed that he tried, but it just couldn't hold. It couldn't hold. When it's the black players who miss the penalties, and it's the black players who are getting all the. Even that alliance in football could not hold, and which is basically the problem of the Keir Starmer government at the moment. The centre cannot hold.
It makes me think. My thoughts on that is that it's maybe we've just got to go on the warpath, actually. If we can't build the alliance, then this is just going to have to be a fight, is what I think. And I'm so fed up with those dudes trying to monopolise the meaning of Englishness. It's like so bellicose and so narrow.
Has anyone told them that tea doesn't actually come from England? Anyone ever told them that?
England. I think about E.P. Thompson at the Glastonbury Festival in 1984, getting up on the stage after Elvis Costello, and saying to the crowd, England is not just a country of colonists and militarists, though it is that. It is a country of actors, of playwrights, of dreamers, of utopians. This is the England of John Milton and Alexei Sale, and William Blake, and Linton Kwesi Johnson and Benjamin Zephaniah. That's my England, an England of depth, of humour, of vision, of culture. And what have you guys got? You're trying, what kind of England do you represent? And I think that we got to go on the warpath, actually. And we saw just a hint of that, I thought, in the Euros, is that, of course, the racists grabbed the headlines. But on the other hand, the outpouring of love for Marcus Rashford, and for Jadon Sancho and for Saka was immense.
And
Online.
that outpouring of love continues till today. When people reference it in the general public, you don't hear the naysayers. You don't hear the worst of the England supporters, as you, I think, very acutely described it. I actually think, Tim, that was a good moment, a great moment. We flushed out what needed to be said. Sometimes, as we see with the current sort of attacks on migrant hotels, things need to be said that aren't being said. We used to say them. When I went to live in Sweden, they kept racism under wraps. They didn't want to discuss it. And I found, in my experience, that was a much worse experience, to go to somebody's house and realize, oh, fuck's sake, they are really, really racist. Imagine that. I traveled 800 miles, I think, once to visit the family of a girl that I was seeing, and she didn't realize her family was racist till I got there. Right. Imagine that, what it meant for her and for me and for our relationship and for her relationship with her parents and all of that. But here in Britain, they tell you straight to your face, mate. I mean, somebody said that to me on air. Said to me, this woman from Liverpool said, look, I'll be quite honest with you. You talk about migrants. I'll be quite honest with you, I don't like black people. And I just left it. I didn't say a word. Mm-hmm. I let her finish what she was saying. She ranted on for she didn't rant actually. She was like quite calm about it. Yeah, I just don't like black people. I just don't like black people. I don't like black people. And then after I let her rant or go on about that for a couple of minutes, I suddenly said, I hate to break the news to you, but in the shade. And, it was, for me, it's like, well, at least we said it out in the open. Don't pretend you're coming on and talking to me like, you're my best friend. And behind me, you're trying to, do a Julius Caesar on me or a Brutus and Cassius on me. No, tell me to my face. And we had to have that conversation. It was an important moment.
Sure.
But then what's happened since then is it redefined.
It's so much easier.
What is an English footballer?
Right. It's so much easier to have this conversation because like a successful society is a factory of progress. It's when one generation does better than the previous, and it's so easy to integrate people when society is working on that basis. The problem is that when you don't have a successful society, and one of the things that just a concentration of income. This is why I go back to property. It doesn't create any value, but it just concentrates income. It doesn't create value. It's just madness. It's a mad economic model. And one of the things you also touch on, to the absolute disgrace of any footballer who's got involved in this, is the NFT token things and the cryptocurrency. Because if you strip them back, all they seem to be is the transference of wealth from people who don't have money to people who already have lots.
And from the naive to the cynical, and from the desperate to the organised. It is an absolute disgrace. These are nothing but Ponzi schemes. And that, that goes for straight crypto, but it also goes for the fan tokens. I think the NFTs are sort of like laughable and ridiculous. And, John Terry selling, the ape cartoons and like, okay, it's bad and it's a rip-off and it's a disgrace that they're involved. But for the clubs to allow the fan tokens to operate, which are so obviously a form of cryptocurrency and a rip-off, and, they say, oh, no, it's all about, fan engagement and fan involvement. So, like, you've got to pay up money and lose money so you can vote on whose toilet bag in the dressing room we get a photo of. This is an absolute disgrace. And, never mind banning the gambling on shirts, socios in particular. But, I mean, they're not the only guilty party here. They really got to be just driven out. And the gambling, You know, I mean, I should say I'm not against gambling per se. I love to have a little bet on the World Cup. I have a bet on the World Cup. In fact, I've got it right the last two, I would say, my £10 bet. And I love to have an each way bet on the Grand National, right? And there's nothing, but what we've got going on in football is, it's scary. It's scary. And we're talking about somewhere in the region of 400 or 500 gambling related suicides in Britain every year, most of which are based on gambling on football. And this has just got to stop. I mean, 500 suicides. So, like, if that's the suicides, what's the kind of mountain of mental ill health and misery and family breakup, because people have been hooked on, like, who's going to get in the next corner in a Bolton versus, Preston game. I find that just absolutely so depressing. And it's not like football's short of potential sponsors. I mean, really, you
I agree
know,
with you.
it's
I agree
like
with you.
pull your finger out, people, you know?
Do you remember when we thought it was the end of Formula One, that they couldn't advertise cigarette smoking, death, killing people by smoking on their motor vehicles? Oh no, it's going to be the end of Formula One. No, it's not the end of Formula One. What I would say, though, the most shocking thing about the betting sponsorship, which I think is a particular issue, just like drinking arguably was in the days of Newcastle Brown Ale and so on, the most shocking thing is, you go down the road and see a 7-year-old kid wearing that replica shirt. What they got on the front? What they got on the front? It's, I
Yeah.
mean,
Well,
what we
check out Match of the Day's the BBC's Match of the Day magazine, or Shoot. All right, they are absolutely plastered with gambling, and the most extraordinary. I put this in the book is that on West Ham United's website, there's a colouring in page, right, for the under fives. It's got Betway and betting adverts all over it for the under fives. Like, this is, if it wasn't so awful, it would be really funny. So I really think football, really, really needs to rein itself in here. This is not acceptable.
that is more or less the conclusion of your book, though, isn't it? If we sort of summed it up.
There's one little thing, little bit of hope
Oh yeah,
at the end of the book, because for me, the most basic truth about the human being is that we're a social animal. You look at a human being, we're not very fast, we're not very strong. How on earth have we achieved this? It's by cooperation, and it's the need to
absolutely.
cooperate. That's why we have language, for example. It's one thing to have the potential of language, but why do we develop the actuality of language? Because,
Mm,
well, I know how to cross this river, but I need you to cross the river as well, because we got to hunt together, because I'm going to
yeah,
die on my own. So,
yeah.
we are a
We're
collective
social beings.
species. Yeah.
No, I do maintain, though I have to work at it, a lot of optimism. Football possesses really profound cultural jewels that are no longer available in much of British society. It really is a space that is communitarian. It really is a space that believes collective action works. That we are bigger, than the sum of our parts. We really believe that we're only as good as our weakest link, and you have to look after that weakest link. That success and failure are collectively, not individually, earned and experienced. These are profound truths with real moral and political weight. Football's a place we still believe that, the impossible can happen, that last minute turnarounds can happen. And naive maybe I am, but it seems to me that we have lost that so many aspects of our political and collective life. And here it is right in front of us every Saturday, or these days, Friday evening, Monday afternoon, there it is. And that is an extraordinary resource. And you see it, the number of people who volunteer in football is extraordinary. 1.7 million, at least, more than any other social activity or organization in the country. People are volunteering, giving of their time and their best of their time and their energy, to this process. You look at the food banks that are supported by football fans. I mean, it's just incredible that Anfield and now Bramley, I can't remember what actually they called it, but anyway, Everton's new gaff. These guys are supplying a quarter of the food banks in all of Liverpool. I mean, from the generosity of football fans gathering and organising, this is like, and we saw it during COVID, that at its best, football not just brings us together, but stimulates like really important action. And I thought there were moments of that in the challenge to the European Super League as well.
It's the moment when I felt most proud of my homeland in
Yeah.
a long, long time.
So all of that is sitting, and I don't think that's just football. I think that's British society. The populists and the angry old men, and the violent racists grab the headlines and try and dominate the street. But they are not the majority. And I think the same is true in football. Actually, there is a majority that is progressive and communitarian. I mean, I think that about the race issue. On the one hand, sure, you've got all the boneheads booing people taking the knee. And then eventually, the others get around to like, oh, actually, we're not having this. So we're going to drown them out with applause, which was what was happening in the friendlies in the lead up to Euro 2020. And sure, it took people time and people were a little bit sheepish about it because the other lot are so aggressive and so unpleasant. But eventually we got there. And that gives me hope for the country. And it gives me hope, I think in football. I'm not giving in to the forces of global capitalism, and I'm not giving in to the forces of cultural cynicism. It would be easy, and there's lots of good reason to do so. But football's a space where hope and the possibility of the impossible. I was saying to someone earlier, one of the joys of my life is to walk up to a football stadium and get that kind of shiver down my spine. It's like, anything can happen. Anything can happen today. And sometimes, nothing happens. And sometimes, shit happens. And it's amazing. And I think we need that as a society. We need to mobilise that and we need to feel that in our heart.
Of course, there has always been, I think, a time when football has been able to be interpreted in global terms, and particularly in England, perhaps more so than other countries, whether it's because of our relationship, with the game coming from here and our arrogance, as you often talk about, Tim, about how we declined to take part in the first couple of World Cups because we thought it was beneath us. Look, England has a particular relationship to football that maybe other countries don't have. I say maybe because I just don't know. But one of the ways that you express this in your book, David, is that you talked of England losing 6-3, was it, to Hungary, as being the beginning of the decline and fall of the empire. And it did seem to go in tandem with that, Macmillan's famous, the winds of change, etc., and the independence of first Ghana in Africa, well, first India, really, slightly before that. It seemed to go in tandem with that time. If there was a game today of the national team that expressed the times that we live in fact, expressed the subject of your book, what would that game be?
Oh, you put me on the spot, you
Okay.
bugger. Let me think about. No, it's a really, really good question. It's a really good question. I mean, okay, so one positive. I mean, I think the two Euro finals of 2021-22 are the two sides of England. The men's final, as you know, was an absolute shit show. Of cocaine-driven, toxic masculine madness with an extra serving of entitled racism to follow. Right?
It's the end of the social contract, isn't it? There are no rules that need to be obeyed anymore.
So that's one, and that is part of who England is. And then there's the women winning the following year. And I talk about this in the book, but what a different England. I'm walking down Wembley Way. Suddenly I hear my voice being shouted out, David Goldblatt, David Goldblatt. I'm thinking, oh my God, what's going on? This woman's picked up my bank card, all right, and she wants to give it back to me. You know, at the men's game, that would have been down Tesco's buying fags on contactless or a kind of stack of beer, right? We're playing Germany, right? Not a single reference to the Second World War. And most fantastic of all, I was there with my partner, Sarah. And, you know, Sarah really likes football. She loves the World Cup. You know, she likes to fall asleep to Match of the Day on a Saturday night. She knows the names and addresses, but basically she doesn't give a fuck. And when we won, right, she's standing there and she said to me, you know, we won, we won. And it's the first time, she said, it's the first time I felt like part of the we. I actually felt like part of the we. I was just like, wow, what a moment. What a transformatory, amazing, amazing moment. What a different kind of England, you know? And that's England, you know, and that's football in England. I absolutely love it and I absolutely hate it. It brings me unparalleled joy and it makes me totally despair at the same time. So yeah, I'm gonna go with the 2 Euro finals.
I like that. Tim, what would you go for?
He's just done it for us, hasn't he? And he really has, because it's such a complex and contradictory country. You know, what do you think of what is England to you? What is it? And to me, it's probably the small faces doing Eddie's Dreaming. You know, a song I sent to you once. It's got a kind of salsa vibe to it. You know, in 66, 67, you think, how on earth are they clued up to that? And it's about someone from of like the Windrush generation. And they've assimilated that, and that for me is England. But the dark side is so dark, isn't there? And so you think, Dave, a fight is coming. That's the only way we're going to sort this out.
The fight is here. The fight is here right now. You know, it'll be there on Saturday morning in Bristol before I go to Bristol Rovers. You know, where the right are marching on a hostel, and Bristol's anti-fascists will be lining up against them. The fight is here. This is not this. It's like the climate crisis. It's not happening next week. It's not happening 5 years from now. It's all here right now. You know, and we need to engage. And I remain hopeful that the very best of what I see in the country and the very best of what I see in football, you know, will carry us through. I mean, I think it's and it's interesting. I think the populists, much as they would love to mobilise football and its darkest constituencies, I think they're struggling actually. I don't think I'm not sure. You know, I think it's really interesting that, you know, that Spiv Farage, you know, if he could, he'd be playing the football fan. He loves to play, right? The man down the pub you can have a beer and a fag with, right? Even if he is public school educated and backed by billionaires, right? And he has
With a
toyed,
German wife.
you know, and he's toyed with you know, football. He says, oh, I'm a Crystal Palace fan, though I haven't seen him down Selhurst Park too recently. And I'm not sure what of a reception he would get either. And they can't mobilise. Like, yeah, sure, they got a few nasty old casuals who want to turn up for a punch up outside the hostels, but they can't really mobilise. Not like, I mean, you know, you look back to the 70s and 80s when the NF was like seriously entrenched, you know, at Leeds, at Chelsea, and a whole bunch of other clubs. I don't see that. I mean, maybe I'm being naive, but I don't see that.
I think you see it with the players, with the taking a knee thing, the way that the white players just clicked into that, because as a result of their lived experience coming up the youth ranks with so many black players, they've got a window into the black experience, and I think I would hope that's replicated all over the country now as a result of generations of living
not
together.
Not just a window, but one that they've actively jumped through. I think, and here I'm going to say, my prejudices and my ignorance have been challenged and undermined by Wayne Rooney, who in his interview on the BBC this week said, you know, one of the things he's done during his career, he hasn't talked about it, but he's talking about now, is educated himself in other people's religions and in black history, because these are my colleagues. These are the people in the dressing room. And I want to be able to have serious conversations with them about what's serious in their lives. I just thought, wow, who would have thought, you know? This is it's a different generation of footballers. It's a different generation of young people in this country. And there are bad ones out there, of course. You know, Joey Barton has his constituency. But I think they're the minority. And I think they're the past in football.
I think that's the past. I will say that, and you talked about the England flag or the flag of St George earlier on. There is a trajectory there because, of course, in the 70s, when the National Front were very much on the march, the more sort of like fearsome aspect of the far right was, for me as a black person anyway, was this thing called the BNP, the British National Party. And whereas the National Front went for the Union flag as their symbol when they marched, you know, I remember going to sort of anti-National Front or anti-Nazi League marches. There were in those days as a 16, 17-year-old. Suddenly, you know, you'd be walking on a normal high street, then you turn the corner and there'd be all these like hundreds of Union flags. Then you knew you were at the right place or the wrong place, as the case may be. But the British National Party, their symbol was the flag of St George. And they appropriated that to the extent that if I saw somebody with a flag of St George, I would be really intimidated, if not quite fearful, of what happened next. You know, if you talk about 1975, 76, 77 maybe. And then something happened during Euro 96, as you know, probably happened before that as well, but clearly, Euro 96, and suddenly the Sun had on its front pages, you know, flags of St George and everything like that, and everybody bought into that. And that's when I realised, oh, it's safe, as you know, Laurence Olivier says over and over again in is it the Marathon? No, is it whatever film that was that he plays a former dentist
Yeah,
in
that's
the
Marathon Man.
concentration
Yeah.
camps. It is Marathon Runner, yeah, or Marathon Man, and. What I was going to say is why I've got hope is that we always seem to, it's like you've got this Bergkamp preface or thought, philosophical line or two. And he says something like, football always needs some thought behind it. You know, it's exactly what you're saying about Wayne Rooney. You get to the point, you can't play football anymore without the thought, the, you know, philosophical thought about what is this about, and you know, where is my space in this. I'll tell you that one of the most profound. My game would be a game in the future, which would be when England, any time now, wins the Euros. That would be my game. The moment that I saw that England changed most profoundly, and I talked to you about this, Tim, was when in was it the World Cup in 2004 when England played Brazil, and the game was
2002.
early in the morning for us.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
remember this. Go on.
early in the morning for us. Early in the morning.
I'll
Breakfast.
tell you, it was even earlier in the morning for me.
Yeah. Well, I sat there, and my daughter was probably about 4 or 5 years old at this point, and my daughter asked me as we had the TV on, "Who are you supporting?" And I said, without missing a beat, "Brazil, of course." And my wife looked at me really sternly. I'd never seen her. She looked like she was going to hit me, and she wouldn't do that, of course. And she said, "How can you say that? Look at those players." And it was the first time I ever took a proper look at the England team. You know, they were just robots as far as I was concerned before. You know, I love them as robots. I love the 66 team, etc., but never looked beyond their football shirts to see who they really were. And as I looked, oh my goodness, half of the team were either of, ethnically African Caribbean, whether they be of mixed heritage or, of African Caribbean straight heritage, whatever that means. And I realised that things had changed, but I think it will really change when England win the trophy that allows us that breathing space to embrace everybody in the team, because that's really what is going to defeat the bad side of the England support, because there just won't be any room for that. After 66, we lived on that for half a century, and we still arguably do to a certain extent. And I think we need that space to come away from um, the Euro scandal with the penalty shootouts, etc. But what I was going to say, just allow me this one thing. I know, Tim, you're dying to come in here. I'll tell you, one of the most profound moments I ever experienced was they were talking to Emil Smith Rowe of Arsenal a few years back now, obviously when he was still at Arsenal. And he's best mates with Bukayo Saka. They grew up together and everything like that. And as I was listening, I think I was probably listening on the radio. I couldn't tell who was Bukayo Saka and who was Emil Smith Rowe. They talked in exactly the same kind of North London Caribbean-ish vernacular that all the kids have nowadays. Yeah, so what's he going to do? I remember, what's his name? First name, Davis, who was the captain of Bolton for a while. I remember driving into Media City, where Five Live are based, one Friday evening, and he was on the radio, and I had Five Live tuned in, and they were talking about racism, and he goes, yeah, I haven't experienced it myself, but my brother has, and he tells me all about it, because his brother's of mixed heritage. We're getting to the point where there aren't going to be many footballers around who do not have some black either in them, in their family, amongst their friends. We're getting to that point. That's the real landscape of football for me. Any thoughts, David? Yeah. Don't leave me with the final word. We're going to wrap up in a minute.
I mean, of course, we have won the Euros twice, but the women's team, and this is interesting, is by no means as diverse. Certainly not.
That's the point I was going to make earlier on. With the exception of James and Ajermain, they seem to be. I'm not a specialist on them, but they seem to be white working class. The women's team,
white working class, low middle class, very much. Yeah, and I'm not. It's really. I mean, I think the FA is concerned about this, and I have heard the argument made that the routes into women's football slightly different. The grassroots culture is slightly different from the men's game, but I think it's a real issue. And I think if you'd have gone back, to the era of when Hope Powell was the coach of the women's team, which was a really amazing thing. Black London lesbian in charge of England. Like, wow, this is the 21st century. I think it was a slightly more diverse body of women players in England, and it's interesting. I don't know what I don't know what the sort of sociological roots of this is, but something definitely needs to be done about it. But it was, I think you're right, Dutton, to say is like when England, when the England men, because of course that's where all the racist fans are. I mean, the England women's fan base is completely different. I mean, if you've ever been to, of course you have, to a women's game in the WSL, like it's a whole completely different vibe. You're not going to get that kind of like toxic male and racist energy there. Yeah, it'll be absolutely unbelievable when that happens. I cannot wait.
But,
And
David,
what will give me the most joy of all, of course, is if that occurs under a German coach.
Yeah, well,
You never
we're
know.
running out of time. We're running out of time for that one, because I'm not sure he's going to survive beyond the World Cup. But let's wait and see with Thomas Tuchel or Serena Wiegmann. Why not? Dutch, but nevertheless. But let me say very quickly on a final point. Let's not forget that the England women's team went through, I think, a pretty much existential race crisis with allegations against the coach, remember? And
yeah,
I think that you don't realise how that impacts on people. You don't realise.
That's a really good point, man. That's a very good point. The whole what was he called? Mark Sampson, and the treatment of Eni Aluko and other members of the squad. So yeah, no, look, racism is
And
there.
and you remember, crucially, the England women came out in support of the coach. Many of them.
Yeah,
As I was looking at that, that wouldn't have enticed me
yeah,
to
yeah,
go and join that England camp. And I think those things take a while to recover.
yeah. I think you're right.
Great. It's been absolutely fascinating. Like I said, the books, yes, indeed, Injury Time. Thank you very much. Tim, that's what you're here for, amongst other things, but your wisdom and critical thinking as well. Both of you. I said 2 Legendinos in one pod. Can't do better than that. Welcome back anytime. The book's called Injury Time. It's by our guest, David Goldblatt. And you might have problems with your other half because you're going to take it to bed with you.
Well, thank you very much, guys. It's been lovely to be with you. It's always a pleasure to chat. I'd love to come back. We've only, as ever, just sort of scratched the surface. So anytime. Plus, Dutton, really love your sofa, dude.
Thank you. Yes. My daughters do too. They've forgiven me for all my other misjudgments in terms of fashion. They love it.
No, class. Like that a lot.
Thank you. Join us again for another Brazilian Shirt Name podcast. You know where we're at, Wednesdays and sometimes Thursdays as well.
Get in touch with the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast on Twitter at BrazilShirtPod, or you can email us brazilianshirtnamepod@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and tell a friend. The Brazilian Shirt Name podcast is an 1129 production.